In February 2008, the body of 38-year-old Trooper Leila Porter was discovered in her Hanover, New Hampshire home. An investigation unraveled the shocking secret of her affair with fellow state trooper Alan Hayes. In December 2007, at the New Hampshire State Police Barracks, a series of decisions and betrayals began to unfold, leading to a devastating tragedy. At 6:45 a.m., Leila Porter, a respected state trooper, is found dead in her home. Her teenage daughter Emily discovers the scene. Her mother lying in a pool of blood in the kitchen, a single gunshot wound to the chest. The gun, a service-issued weapon, is placed conspicuously near Leila's hand, staged to look like a suicide. Emily, trembling, calls 911. The dispatcher's calm instructions contrast with her panicked sobs. Hanover police and state investigators arrive quickly, led by Detective Garrett Lynch, a no-nonsense investigator with 25 years of experience. The initial assessment raises questions. Leila's service weapon is unusually clean, despite the blood spatter, and there are no signs of forced entry. Detective Garrett Lynch had spent decades unraveling criminal mysteries, but the case of Trooper Leila Porter's death felt different from the start. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that unsettled him, it was the cracks in the surface of a seemingly perfect life. Leila Porter, 38, had built a reputation as a diligent and principled state trooper. She had joined the force in her late 20s, balancing her role as a single mother with her ambition to rise in a male-dominated field. Her teenage daughter Emily was her world. Leila had always put Emily first, juggling long shifts and late-night casework, while making sure to attend school events, parent-teacher meetings, and their traditional Friday night movie marathons. Colleagues described her as driven but kind-hearted, someone who didn't hesitate to lend a helping hand, even after a grueling day on patrol. But behind her badge and uniform, Leila carried burdens she didn't share. After her divorce, she struggled with loneliness and a longing for connection. When Alan Hayes, a senior trooper in his early 40s, began showing interest in her, she couldn't help but be drawn to him. Alan was charismatic and respected, a man with a spotless record, and a calm authority that made him a natural leader. He had been with the force for nearly 2 decades, and was often praised for his quick thinking in high-pressure situations. What started as friendly camaraderie between colleagues quickly deepened into something more. Alan's marriage to Deborah, a school teacher known for her charitable work in the community, seemed stable on the surface. They had 2 young sons, and their family photos were often featured in local newsletters. But Alan had confided in Leila about the cracks in his marriage, telling her he felt trapped in a life that no longer made him happy. Leila, in turn, confided her own fears that she was unworthy of love, that she was destined to live the rest of her life alone. Their affair was passionate but fraught with tension. Leila wanted more than stolen moments and whispered promises. She began pressing Alan to leave Deborah, telling him that they could build a life together if he was willing to take the risk. Alan, however, was hesitant. He had too much to lose: a stable home, his standing in the community, and his spotless career. By February 14, 2008, Detective Lynch and his team began to piece together the complexity of Leila's life. During the initial stages of the investigation, Emily Porter had mentioned overhearing arguments between her mother and a man she worked with. This vague lead sent the detectives combing through Leela's phone records, emails, and work logs. What they uncovered painted a startling picture. Explicit emails between Leela and Alan surfaced, detailing a relationship that had grown increasingly volatile. In one exchange, Leela expressed frustration with Alan's reluctance to leave his wife. In another, Alan pleaded with her for patience, saying he needed more time. It was clear from the tone of their correspondence that Leela had been growing impatient and Alan had been feeling cornered. Detective Lynch called Alan Hayes in for questioning on February 14, 2008, a cold winter morning that mirrored the tension in the room. Alan arrived in uniform, his usual composed demeanor faltering as Lynch began to probe. At first, Alan denied any involvement with Leela beyond a professional relationship, but when the emails and text messages were presented, his resolve cracked. He admitted to the affair, though he downplayed its significance, describing it as a mistake he had been trying to end. The investigation into Alan's private life revealed a man far more complicated than his public persona. Alan had married Deborah when they were both in their early 20s. At the time, he had been a fresh recruit at the police academy, and Deborah had been working as a teaching assistant. Their life together had seemed idyllic. Family vacations to the coast, community barbecues, and Christmas cards sent to nearly everyone they knew. But Alan's career consumed him, leaving little time for his family. Deborah had become more involved in community projects, filling the void his absence created. Their relationship devolved into polite, but distant cohabitation. The pressure of balancing a failing marriage, the demands of his job, and the intensity of his affair with Leela had pushed Alan to a breaking point. His colleagues began to notice subtle changes in him. During the weeks leading up to Leela's death, he was more irritable, prone to snapping at junior officers during briefings. Some chalked it up to job stress, but in hindsight it seemed like a man unraveling under the weight of his secrets. Meanwhile, the autopsy results added another layer to the mystery. The medical examiner concluded that Leela had been shot at close range, but the angle of entry made it impossible for her to have pulled the trigger herself. It was a staged suicide, and the evidence suggested premeditation. The investigators were certain they were dealing with a homicide, and all signs pointed to Alan. The forensic team delivered a breakthrough on February 20, 2008. A routine search of Alan Hayes' car turned up a jacket that tested positive for gunpowder residue. This discovery, combined with CCTV footage from a nearby traffic camera, placed Alan's car less than half a mile from Leela's house on the night of the murder. Alan claimed he had been conducting a routine patrol, but the timing was suspicious. He had logged off duty hours earlier. Emily Porter also provided a critical piece of information. In her second interview, she recalled hearing her mother arguing with Alan in their kitchen just days before the murder. Emily hadn't been able to make out every word, but Leela's voice had been sharp and insistent, while Alan's tone was low and tense. After the argument, Leela had stormed upstairs, slamming her bedroom door, while Alan left without saying goodbye. The argument, coupled with Leela's emails, threatening to reveal their affair to Deborah, painted a picture of a relationship spiraling out of control. Detective Lynch began to see the pieces falling into place. Alan, fearing the collapse of his marriage and career, had the motive, the means, and now the opportunity to silence Leela permanently. As the evidence mounted, The pressure on Allen intensified. Colleagues who had once admired him began to distance themselves. Rumors swirled through the department, and the media caught wind of the investigation. Though details were kept tightly under wraps, Allen's composed facade started to crumble, and he began avoiding contact with anyone outside his immediate family. Detective Lynch, however, wasn't ready to arrest Allen just yet. He wanted every piece of evidence in place, knowing the case would be heavily scrutinized. The investigation continued, but one thing was clear. The walls were closing in on Allen Hayes. Detective Garrett Lynch knew the key to solving a case often lay hidden in the smallest details. As the investigation into Leila Porter's murder entered its third week, every lead pointed back to Allen Hayes. But there was still one glaring question. Why now? What could have driven Allen, a man with a pristine reputation, to risk everything in such a violent and permanent way? The answer, it turned out, was buried in his financial records. Lynch had assigned a junior detective to comb through Allen's bank statements, credit reports, and financial history. What they discovered on March 1, 2008, sent shockwaves through the team. Just a month earlier, Deborah Hayes, Allen's wife, had inherited a staggering $500,000 from her late father, an affluent businessman. The inheritance was a life-changing amount, deposited directly into a joint account Allen shared with Deborah. But there was a catch. If Deborah filed for divorce, Allen would lose access to that money entirely. This revelation painted Allen's actions in a new light. The stakes were no longer just his marriage or reputation, they were financial survival. If Leila had followed through on her threats to expose their affair, the fallout would have been catastrophic. Deborah would undoubtedly have left him, and Allen's career would have been irreparably damaged. Faced with losing everything, Allen's desperation seemed to have reached a breaking point. Yet just as the team began to solidify their case against Allen, a new shadow of doubt emerged. Deborah Hayes, the woman at the heart of Allen's potential unraveling, became a suspect herself. Deborah had been quiet during the investigation, maintaining a calm and composed exterior. She had told detectives she had spent the evening of February 11, 2008, at home with her children, helping them with homework and preparing for a charity event at their church. But as Lynch and his team delved deeper, cracks began to appear in her story. A witness came forward on the March 1, 2008, claiming to have seen a car matching Deborah's parked near Leila's home on the night of the murder. The description was specific enough to raise eyebrows: a black sedan with a bumper sticker for a local Christian school, just like the one Deborah drove. The timeline matched the estimated time of death, and suddenly, the possibility of Deborah confronting Leila became a real consideration. Detectives began to reconsider Deborah's potential role in the crime. Could she have found out about the affair and taken matters into her own hands? There was no denying she had motive. The affair was a betrayal of her marriage, her family, and her carefully constructed life. Deborah was known for her temper, and several acquaintances hinted at a darker side beneath her polished image. If she had discovered Leila's existence, her fury might have driven her to confront Leila, with devastating consequences. But there were also reasons to doubt Deborah's involvement. She had no known history of violence, and her behavior during the investigation had been cooperative, if somewhat reserved. Her alibi, though shaky, was partially corroborated by her older son, who remembered her being home that evening. Still, the lingering possibility that she had played a part in the crime added a layer of complexity to the case, forcing the detectives to broaden their scope, even as the evidence against Allen mounted. By March 8, 2008, the case against Allen Hayes had reached a critical point. Forensic analysis of the bullet recovered from Lela Porter's body confirmed what detectives had suspected all along. It came from Allen's service weapon. The weapon, reported missing by Allen a week before the murder, had been found at the scene, conveniently placed to suggest a suicide. But the meticulous work of the crime lab revealed Allen's fingerprints on the gun's grip, a damning piece of evidence he couldn't explain away. The final nail in Allen's coffin came from surveillance footage. Detectives had pieced together his movements on the night of the murder, tracking his car to within blocks of Lela's house. During the critical hours, the gunpowder residue found on his jacket only further implicated him, solidifying the timeline. While Allen maintained his innocence, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, the truth was clear to Lynch and his team. Allen had both the motive and the means to kill Lela Porter. The arrest was carried out in the early hours of March 8, 2080. While the Hayes family slept, Lynch had made the call to execute the warrant at dawn, hoping to minimize the scene's impact on Allen's two young sons. But no amount of planning could soften the blow of what was to come. When officers arrived at Allen's suburban home, Deborah answered the door, visibly disoriented in her robe and slippers. She was given a little time to process what was happening before Allen was handcuffed and escorted out. The children, awakened by the commotion, stood at the top of the stairs, their faces pale with confusion and fear. Deborah's expression shifted from shock to fury. But whether her anger was directed at Allen or the officers was unclear. Allen maintained his composure as he was placed in the back of a patrol car, but his eyes betrayed his growing panic. The neighbors, already peeking through curtains and stepping onto their porches, began whispering amongst themselves. The once admired trooper was now a man marked by scandal and suspicion, his carefully constructed life unraveling in front of everyone. Back at the station, Allen was charged with first-degree murder. His silence during the booking process was deafening, a stark contrast to his earlier defiance. During questioning, he requested a lawyer immediately, but the weight of the evidence against him left little room for doubt. Deborah, though initially questioned as a potential co-conspirator, was not formally implicated due to a lack of concrete evidence. Her role in the case remained ambiguous, leaving the detectives and the community to speculate about her possible involvement. Had she been complicit in the cover-up, or was she another victim of Allen's lies and betrayal? The truth for now remained elusive. As the sun rose over the quiet streets of Hanover, the town was left reeling. The arrest of Allen Hayes, a once respected figure in the community, marked the beginning of a long and painful journey for everyone involved. For Detective Lynch, the case was far from over. But one thing was certain: the tangled web of love, lies, and betrayal that led to Lela Porter's death had forever changed the lives of those left behind. The trial of Allen Hayes began in August 2009, drawing national attention to a case that had already captivated the small community of Hanover, New Hampshire. The courtroom packed with reporters, curious locals, and those directly affected by the tragedy buzzed with anticipation. The once respected state trooper now sat at the defendant's table, his clean-cut image replaced by a somber, weathered face. Alan wore the weight of his choices. In every tense movement, his gaze fixed downward. As the prosecution laid bare the tangled web of betrayal and murder. For the prosecution, the case was clear-cut. Assistant District Attorney Marlene Carson, a seasoned litigator, with a reputation for being relentless in high-profile cases, painted Alan as a desperate man. She methodically built the story of a state trooper who had risked everything for an affair with a colleague, only to kill her when she became a threat to his carefully constructed life. Carson emphasized Alan's financial motives, highlighting how Deborah Hayes's recent inheritance of $500,000 had become a crucial factor. A divorce would not only expose the affair, but strip him of the financial stability he coveted. The prosecution's case relied heavily on forensic evidence. Carson presented the findings of the crime scene, the ballistic match between Alan's service weapon and the fatal bullet, the gunpowder residue found on his jacket, and the surveillance footage placing him near Leela's home on the night of the murder. Each piece of evidence further painted Alan as a man cornered by his own actions, lashing out in violence to protect his reputation. A pivotal moment came when Emily Porter, Leela's teenage daughter, took the stand. Emily's testimony was heart-wrenching, laying bare the emotional toll the affair and subsequent murder had taken on her young life. Emily recounted the arguments she had overheard between her mother and Alan in the weeks leading up to the murder. While her voice trembled, she remained composed, describing how Leela had grown increasingly anxious and angry, often pacing the house late at night. Emily's perspective gave the jury a glimpse into Leela's final days, filled with fear and frustration, as she realized the dangerous path her relationship with Alan had taken. Emily's testimony wasn't just about her mother's state of mind. It also illuminated the tension between Alan and Leela. She described hearing Alan's voice raised during an argument with her mother just days before the murder. While Emily didn't understand all the details at the time, her account added a deeply personal layer to the prosecution's narrative. The court watched in silence as Emily, now living with her aunt and uncle, broke down in tears, mourning the loss of her mother, while grappling with the betrayal that had shattered her family. The defense, led by attorney Paul Grayson, fought to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. Grayson, a calm and calculated lawyer, argued that Alan was being framed. He pointed to Deborah Hayes as a potential suspect, raising questions about her whereabouts on the night of the murder and her possible jealousy over the affair. Grayson claimed that Deborah had far more to lose emotionally than Alan, portraying her as an unstable woman driven to desperate measures. Grayson also attempted to undermine the forensic evidence, suggesting that the crime scene had been tampered with or mishandled by investigators. He argued that Alan's fingerprints on the weapon could have been transferred under innocent circumstances, and he downplayed the significance of the gunpowder residue, calling it inconclusive. However, the defense's strategy faltered when Deborah Hayes took the stand under immunity. Her testimony was a defining moment in the trial. Deborah, poised but visibly shaken, portrayed herself as a betrayed wife, grappling with the humiliation of her husband's infidelity. She described how she had discovered the affair shortly before Leela's murder, but had chosen to confront Alan privately rather than act out in anger. Deborah's composure and the consistency of her account painted her as a victim rather than a perpetrator, effectively dismantling the defense's attempts to implicate her. Her testimony also shed light on Alan's demeanor in the weeks leading up to the murder. Deborah described him as agitated and withdrawn, often leaving the house late at night without explanation. She told the jury that, while she had hoped to repair their marriage for the sake of their children, she had sensed that Alan was spiraling out of control. By the time the prosecution rested its case, the jury had been presented with a damning portrait of Alan Hayes. The financial motive, the forensic evidence, and the emotional testimonies combined to paint a picture of a man who had crossed every line to protect himself. The defense's attempts to cast doubt fell flat, especially in light of Deborah's compelling testimony. On a crisp morning in October 2009, the jury returned its verdict. The courtroom was tense, the air heavy with anticipation. Alan Hayes, once a pillar of the community, stood motionless as the foreman read the decision. Guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence, life without the possibility of parole, was handed down swiftly, leaving no room for leniency. The verdict sent shockwaves through the state police force. Alan's colleagues, many of whom had testified to his professional excellence, were left grappling with the betrayal of one of their own. For a department built on trust and integrity, the revelation of Alan's actions cast a long shadow. For Emily Porter, the verdict marked a bittersweet moment. While it brought a sense of justice for her mother, it couldn't erase the pain of her loss. Emily moved in with relatives out of state, where she began rebuilding her life. Inspired by her mother's strength and the tragic events that unfolded, Emily became an advocate for victims of domestic violence and betrayal, speaking out about the devastating consequences of unchecked desperation and manipulation. Deborah Hayes, now free from the weight of her marriage, moved away from Hanover to escape the whispers and judgment of the community. While she tried to rebuild her life, the scars of Alan's betrayal lingered, leaving her forever tied to a case that had consumed her family. The case of Alan Hayes and Leila Porter remains a chilling reminder of how passion, betrayal, and desperation can lead to unimaginable acts. The trial, with its emotional testimonies and shocking revelations, continues to haunt those who lived through it. A testament to the fragile balance between love and destruction. What drives a person to such extremes? Was Alan's betrayal fueled solely by fear of exposure, or were there darker secrets yet to be uncovered? In the small town of Hanover, questions linger even as justice is served. Stay tuned for more stories that peel back the layers of human behavior, exposing the darkest corners of the human heart. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on our daily stories. And dive into another jaw-dropping case, where a Hollywood actress's secret affair with a famous director that spiraled into a deadly scandal. Check it out and share your thoughts in the comments below.